Milquetoast Mayor Pete Buttigieg got a standing ovation during a Fox News town hall over the weekend, but the polls put Joe Biden at a commanding lead over every candidate, not just the Democrats, that includes President Trump. We examine what the polls will tell us about conservatism from the U.S. to Europe, all the way to Australia. Then, the media pretend that men can get pregnant, an anti-Trump Republican humiliates himself, and revenge porn tests the limit of politics. I'm Michael Knowles, and this is The Michael Knowles Show. This is the first show, I think, in a week where we're not talking about making babies. There was all of those stories, the laws out of Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Missouri last week, all about making babies. Today is the first time that we will move on. We won't talk about it, except for this one thing. We should mention, speaking of making babies, some things are uncomfortable to talk about. Sex is one of those things, but sex is one of the most important things in life. It is so, so great, especially within the context of marriage. Studies show 70% of guys who experience erectile dysfunction don't get treated for it, just for that reason, because it's extremely awkward and you don't want to have to go to the pharmacy counter and say, hey, can I get some pills to fix that problem that I don't want to talk about? Listen, it's nothing to be ashamed about, just like many, many health issues are not anything to be ashamed about. That's where our friends at Roman come in. Thankfully, Roman created an easy way to get checked out by a doctor and get treated for ED online. With Roman, you can get medical care for ED, if appropriate, from the comfort and privacy of your own home. You don't need to worry about that awkward conversation with the pharmacist at the store. You handle everything online in a convenient, discreet manner. Getting started is simple. Just go to getroman.com/Knowles, Knowles, and complete an online visit. If your doctor decides that treatment would be appropriate, they can prescribe genuine medication that can be delivered in discreet packaging right to your door. I emphasize discreet packaging. I know you're worried, fellas. Don't worry about it. Free 2-day shipping. Guys, go to the doctor. Erectile dysfunction can be tough to tackle, but it is really important to get checked out. With Roman, it's easy to connect to a doctor. GetRoman.com/Knowles, Knowles. Get a free online visit, free 2-day shipping. GetRoman.com/Knowles for a free visit to get started. What's that address? You heard it. GetRoman.com/Knowles. Who says we're not pro-life on this show? We're pro-life beginning to end. Has Joe Biden already won the 2020 race? I'm not even just talking about the primary. I'm talking about the whole election. Right now, the Real Clear Politics average, so there are all these different polls. Real Clear Politics comes in, creates the average of all the polls, has Joe Biden at 38.3%, Bernie Sanders, who is in second place in the Democrat primary, at 18.8%, Warren at 8.5%, Harris at 7.3%, Buttigieg at 7%, Beto at a pathetic 3.8%, Booker at a still more pathetic 2.5%, Castro down at 1.5%. I kind of forgot that guy was even running. Not Fidel, not Raul, Julian Castro. Klobuchar at 1.3%, Tulsi Gabbard at 1%, Andrew Yang at 1%, Kirsten Gillibrand at 1%, and I think like 20 other people who aren't even registering. Interesting to note here, all of these people in this polling were national figures before they ran for president, except for Pete Buttigieg and Andrew Yang. But right now, Pete Buttigieg is polling at 7 times the rate of Andrew Yang. So Buttigieg actually putting up some pretty decent numbers for a small-town mayor from the Midwest. Everyone else was a national figure. They are all getting trounced by Joe Biden. And President Trump has already declared this primary over. One of my favorite things that President Trump does is when he acts as a political pundit for the other side. So he tweeted this out. He said, quote, "Looks like Bernie Sanders is history. Sleepy Joe Biden is pulling ahead. And think about it. I'm only here because of Sleepy Joe and the man who took him off the 1% trash heap." That's President Obama. President O. China wants Sleepy Joe badly. I just love this idea. It gives me something to look forward to, that eventually in 6 years not 6 years, 5 years, when President Trump is out of office, that we can look forward to him being on cable news. Listen, these crazy Democrats, oh my goodness. So he's already done this before. He did it with Elizabeth Warren. He said, I think Elizabeth Warren is finished in the race because it turns out that I'm more Indian than she is, and I'm 0% Indian, but she's done. So even President Trump right now is saying Joe Biden is doing very well. He's already kind of talking about Joe Biden as if he is the general election candidate. The problem with this is that Joe Biden isn't only beating all the other Democrats, he's also beating President Trump in the polls, and by a lot. Now, you might say, well, who cares if Joe Biden is beating Trump in the national polls? We don't hold a national election. We hold presidential elections by state. So all that matters is whether Joe Biden is beating Donald Trump in the states that matter: Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, those swing states. Again, here, the trouble is that Joe Biden is not just leading President Trump in the polls in those states, he's trouncing him. He's up by almost 10 points in all those states. In Pennsylvania, he's up by over 10 points. Biden is beating Trump 54 to 43.5. In Michigan, Biden is beating Trump 53.5 to 43. And in Wisconsin, he's beating Trump 54 to 46. So an 8-point lead even in Wisconsin. That is not good news for Donald Trump. And so I see why Donald Trump wants to fight back already in the general. That's a bad idea. Let the Democrats all start to kill each other. This is not even begun yet. Right now we're looking at a lot of name recognition. Joe Biden has a lot of name ID, so naturally he's doing quite well in the polls. But we haven't even had the first debate yet. This hasn't really gotten started. Better to let the Democrats all duke it out themselves. So is the 2020 Democrat race over? Is the even 2020 election over? The debates will play out. You'll have multiple debates. Then you'll get the nominating contest. Then eventually you'll get the general election. Looking at these poll numbers, Trump's down by 10 in the swing states. Is the election over? I think Biden has 3 big weaknesses. Now, the weaknesses pose a problem when you're running against President Trump, but they are weaknesses nonetheless. Number 1, he's corrupt. People aren't really talking about this story, but he's corrupt. Number 2, he's a liar and a bloviator. He lies a lot and he always exaggerates. Number 3, he's been in government forever and he hasn't done very much. Those are the 3 weaknesses: corruption, lies, ineffectiveness. Now, what's the trouble? The trouble is, if you say he's corrupt, then what are you going to point to? You point to the business deals, the shady, sketchy, unfair business deals that his son got in China and the Ukraine. In China, Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, got his private equity firm got a $1 billion deal with the Chinese government. This is according to investigative journalist Peter Schweitzer. Who is Hunter Biden? It's not Beau Biden. Beau Biden is Joe Biden's son who died tragically of brain cancer a few years ago. Hunter Biden is the other son, and Hunter is basically an influence peddler. He's counsel at Boies Schiller, which is a Democrat law firm. He set up a few front companies, one called Rosemont, and he's just peddles influence. And he's not peddling his own influence because he's never held public office. So he's peddling his father's influence. And so while Joe Biden, as vice president of the United States, was negotiating with the Chinese, Hunter Biden's firm received a $1 billion private equity deal with the government. This later increased to $1.5 billion, according to Peter Schweitzer. When did that deal happen? That deal came through hours before Vice President Biden met with the Chinese President Hu Jintao in D.C. for a nuclear security summit. Sure looks like a crony deal to me. More information will come out. Of course, these are all just allegations for now, but sure looks shady. Similar issue in the Ukraine. So same guy, Hunter Biden, same influence peddler, was being investigated in the Ukraine. Ukraine's top prosecutor was looking into a money laundering scheme by a company called Burisma. Burisma, on their board of directors, had Hunter Biden there. They were paying Hunter Biden $50,000 a month. Why? Hunter Biden has never demonstrated any particular skill at anything other than selling influence. But obviously, if the guy's father is the vice president of the United States, if the father is the point person on Ukraine issues with the United States, maybe it would behoove certain actors in the Ukraine to pass over 50 G's a month to Hunter Biden in the hope that some favorable treatment would come from the United States. Now, the top prosecutor in Ukraine was investigating this money laundering scheme, and at that time, Vice President Biden insisted that the prosecutor be removed from office. So Biden, point guy on Ukraine, he goes in, he says, we will withhold $1 billion from Ukraine if this prosecutor is not fired. And you don't need to just take my word for it. You don't need to worry that I'm some conspiracy theorist. Because Joe Biden is so gaffe-prone, he actually managed to brag about this crooked deal at the Council on Foreign Relations. Here he is.
I went over, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time.
People knock Trump for sounding like a mobster when he talks. You know, we're going to end Iran. You're going to do this. This guy's a killer. This guy's a shark. Joe Biden there sounds like a mobster. He said, yeah, I went over to Ukraine. I had all my influence. I had $1 billion of taxpayer money on the table. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion unless you fire that guy that I don't like who's looking into my son's company. And they say to me, you can't make that decision. I says to him, listen to what I says to him. I says, call up the president. You're not getting $1 billion. Do what I say. Fire that prosecutor who's he's looking a little too close. Getting a little too big for his britches over there looking into my son's company, all right? Guess what happened? Son of a gun, the guy gets fired. How about that? He's bragging about it like Tony Soprano. So there is very legitimate corruption. Now, why would Joe brag about this? Is it just because he's a total idiot? Possibly. The other reason, it seems, is maybe he wants to get in front of the story. He wants to frame the story in a way that might be somewhat favorable to him. You know, Joe Biden's whole career is ingratiating himself to people, right? This is why he got in trouble for smelling hair and giving back massages and putting his forehead on another person's forehead. I don't think it's because he's a sexual predator. I think it's because he is a slick, oily politician who's entire skill is getting people to like him. But behind the scenes, he's working. He's working angles. His son is cashing in on his father's influence. He's a politician. He's been in office for a very long time. So you could knock Joe Biden on being corrupt. The issue is, if you go after Joe Biden for being corrupt, then they're just going to go after Donald Trump for being corrupt. And it's worth noting, there is not really a comparison here. There is no evidence of any sort of public corruption that President Trump has engaged in while president, even close to the scale of what Joe Biden is bragging about in that clip. However, Donald Trump has bragged about his corruption of the political process. Before he was president, while he was running for president, he said, for so many years I bought off politicians. He joked about it when Rand Paul was going after him during the 2016 primary. He said, you know, it's funny, Rand, I remember you coming to me and asking for money, and I wrote you that check, huh? I'm the puppet master, right? I'm the guy who's running things. He said, the way he excused donating to Democrats is he said, I was a real estate developer in New York. I had to buy off politicians of both parties. That's just how politics works. So if you go after Biden for corruption, they're going to go after him. Speaking of real estate in New York, if you're developing real estate in New York, you are almost by definition in some way working with the mob. So they'll go after him. They'll say he's literally working with the mobsters. So I just think that angle is going to end up becoming impotent. It's not going to really go anywhere. So, okay, you can't go after him for being corrupt. You can go after him for being a liar, which we'll get to in a second. But don't forget, hiring used to be hard. You remember how hard it was? You'd have all these multiple job sites, stacks of resumes coming in, especially when you're hiring people in Hollywood. You get stacks of resumes, you just throw them in the trash. It's a very confusing review process. Today, hiring can be easy, and you only have to go to one place to get it done. ZipRecruiter.com/Knowles, Knowles. You know, half of the country right now is trying to hire a new president. Imagine how much simpler it would be if we just had ZipRecruiter. Sends your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards. Doesn't just stop there. With their powerful matching technology, ZipRecruiter scans thousands of resumes to find people with the right experience and invites them to apply to your job. Then, you've got the applications coming in. ZipRecruiter is already doing all the work of inviting people over. ZipRecruiter then analyzes each one, spotlights the top candidates, so you never miss a great match. It just takes so much of the work that you or your HR manager or somebody would have to do. It takes so much of that work, so much of the money that work would cost. It just does it for you. It's so effective that 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site within the first day. Right now, my listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/Knowles, Knowles. ZipRecruiter.com/Knowles, ZipRecruiter.com/Knowles, Knowles. ZipRecruiter is the smartest way to hire. So you can't go after, and don't hire Joe Biden, by the way. Please don't hire. That's my personal editorial. You can go after Joe Biden on his corruption, but they're going to go after Trump on corruption. So the next one is you can go after Joe Biden on his lies. And Joe Biden tells some pretty horrifying lies. Again, this has not been covered by the mainstream media. I bet very few people would be able to recall this if you asked them on the street. We know some of Joe Biden's basic lies. We know that when he ran in 1988 for president, he was chased out of the race for plagiarism and for lying about his academic record. We know in 2012, when he was vice president, that he lied about Mitt Romney. He was before an entire auditorium full of black voters, and he said, Mitt Romney wants to put you all back in chains. Pretty shameless lie, pretty shameless race baiting. The lie that is really bizarre and really pretty scary is that Joe Biden has actually lied about the tragic death of his wife and daughter. And he's demonstrably lied about it, and it's been sporadically called out by the mainstream media, but people let him get away with this. Really weird. So decades ago, Joe Biden's wife and daughter were tragically killed in a car accident. His wife, Nelia, and his daughter, Naomi. His sons, Bo and Hunter, were both in the car as well. They were injured, but they luckily survived. How did the car accident happen? It's because Mrs. Biden was driving. She drove into a busy intersection, and unfortunately, she was in the path of an oncoming truck, and the truck hit the car. So what happened here? There was an investigation at the time. The investigators found that the driver of that truck, Curtis Dunn, was blameless. It was just a horrible accident, but he didn't cause it. It wasn't through his negligence or some criminal wrongdoing that this accident happened. It was just an awful accident. Awful car accidents happen all the time. Doesn't make it any less sad or tragic, but he didn't do anything wrong, the driver. Okay. Apparently this guy, by the way, Curtis Dunn, carried this weight with him until 1999. He talked about it all the time, this awful guilt that he carried. Over the course of the decades, Joe Biden started to embellish the story of the death of his wife and daughter, so much so that he just came to lie about it. So over the years, what Joe Biden would start to do is portray the driver as a drunk driver. He said about this poor guy, Curtis Dunn, quote, he allegedly drank his lunch instead of eating his lunch. Then he said he was an errant driver who stopped to drink. Where did this story come from? Even The Atlantic, a left-wing outlet, has admitted that this was just a total lie. This is what The Atlantic wrote, quote, the family of the truck driver has labored to correct the record, but Biden made the reference to drunkenness as recently as 2007, needlessly resurrecting a false and painful accusation. Now, you'll notice something else there when you mention 2007. One explanation for this is that Joe Biden is just so full of anger over the death of his wife and daughter. He hasn't been able to forgive the driver. He's so full of some denial about the accidental nature of it that he's just convinced himself of this, and it's a coping mechanism, and that would be understandable. It would raise a lot of questions about his judgment and his fitness for office, but it would at least be understandable. Except this lie about his wife and daughter's death tends to just come up around election time. So he's bringing this up, apparently, to gain political advantage. That's pretty disgusting. That's pretty awful. One, because of the memory of what happened, and two, because you, as a major public figure in the United States, a very important person, given the public trust, are baselessly defaming a guy who was involved in an accident that he's carried guilt around for decades. That's pretty bad stuff, and of course the family wants to correct the record. If you've got a guy who would be the president of the United States smearing your family member as a drunk driver who, through negligence, killed his wife and daughter, when you know that didn't happen, when there was a full investigation and you know for a fact it didn't happen, that's pretty awful. That's pretty low stuff. A bizarre and a shameless lie. Okay, so you could go after Joe Biden on that front. Could call him Lion Joe instead of Sleepy Joe or something like that. However, if you go after Joe Biden as a liar, what are they going to do? They're going to go after Donald Trump as a liar. Donald Trump for playing fast and loose with the facts. Again, as far as I can tell, Donald Trump has told a lot of lies. Donald Trump has made a lot of false statements. He has never made a false statement so pathological, so bizarre, so low and shameless as that one, as far as I can tell. Actually, when Donald Trump lies, they tend to be less tragic and more fantastical. So when Donald Trump lies, he suggests that Ted Cruz's father murdered JFK, which you know, I mean, I would, if I were Ted Cruz, I would be upset about that. But it's so outlandish that you sort of just have to laugh at it, right? There's nothing. It's not like you're painting some guy as a drunk driver for killing your wife and daughter. Right? How about when he said that? He spent years talking about the Obama birth certificate thing. Again, I guess it's untrue, but also it doesn't really matter. Barack Obama would have been a U.S. citizen even if he had been born in Kenya because he received citizenship at the time of birth from his mother. So it's just a kind of weird, outlandish lie that he would tell. Okay. Now, again, if you hit Joe Biden for the lies, they're going to go after Donald Trump. You can try to explain the difference between the lies. It's probably not going to land. It's probably too subtle for a general election. So then you just get to the third weakness that Joe Biden has, which is that he's been in government forever and he hasn't accomplished anything. This, I think, is a great area. I think this should be all the focus of the Trump re-election campaign if Joe gets the nomination. Joe Biden has been in government for 50 years. He's been in government for half a century. He's been in politics since he was 26 years old. And now I think he's 175 years old. Maybe I didn't do that math right. But he's been in government forever. What has he accomplished? Can you name any major piece of legislation that Joe Biden gets credit for, any major national initiative, any major problem solved because of Joe Biden? No. He's just kind of been there. He's also a loser. I mean, he ran for president in 1988, 30 years ago, and he lost. Then he ran for president in 2008, 20 years after that fact, and he lost. And he would have gone nowhere except that Barack Obama hated Hillary Clinton enough to make Joe Biden his vice president. He's never accomplished anything. Contrast that with Donald Trump. Donald Trump has been in politics for, 3.5 years now, and he's had the most effective record of any president in my lifetime, on the right or the left. The Heritage Foundation pointed out in 2017, 2018, Donald Trump has effected a conservative agenda more quickly even than Ronald Reagan. That's pretty good. And you remember this was a major theme in 2016. Trump talked about there are all talk, no action politicians, and then there are people like me who are action. We're developers, we're builders, we're businessmen. That is, I think, the way to go after Joe Biden. And I think it's pretty devastating because no matter how generic Joe Biden looks, no matter he looks so good in a suit, he's got a good smile, okay, he's got name recognition. Are people really going to pick that, a guy who's never accomplished anything, over the guy who's delivered solid economy, record low unemployment, relative peace abroad? I don't think the race is over. I don't think Joe Biden has the nomination locked up. Even the New York Times, Jill Filipovich, writing in the Times today, had this great headline. Does anybody actually want Joe Biden to be president? No. People would tolerate him. I guess he's probably everybody's number 2 choice. He's doing well in the polls with name IDs basically unobjectionable. But does anyone really want him to be president? It doesn't seem so. Also, remember, at this point in 2016, who were the top GOP contenders? You probably don't remember this, but during the 2016 election, in, I guess, late 2015, the top contenders were, drum roll please, Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, and Scott Walker. Have they How are they doing now? Rubio is still in the Senate, at least. The other two guys aren't anywhere near the government. Anything could happen. I mean, these polls don't tell us a whole lot. And when you see people polling at a low level, but they've kind of surged, they've kind of made a name for themselves, like Buttigieg, you start to wonder if this race is going to start looking radically different. Buttigieg was at a town hall last night at Fox News, the supposedly conservative outlet, and he got a standing ovation. We'll explain how that happened. We'll get to Justin Amash, the anti-Trump Republican who's calling for impeachment, and then we'll get to revenge porn if we have time. But if you want to make it all the way to revenge porn, you've got to go to dailywire.com. It's $10 a month, $100 for an annual membership. You get me, you get the Andrew Klavan Show, you get the Ben Shapiro Show, you get the Matt Walsh Show. You get to ask questions in the mailbag coming up on Thursday. You get to ask questions backstage. You get the Leftist Tears Tumbler. That's the main thing that you need. This is what you want. You need the, oh yeah, that's good. That is a 2020 primary that is going to be bruising and brutal, and it hasn't even started yet. Go to dailywire.com. We'll be right back with a lot more.